Okay, brief mention of things. Hold on, we gotta wait till the. There we go. Okay, so today we have there's just a few of us today. I believe largely because of the eclipse that's going on right at this moment. I have my door open. It's cloudy here, so I will see a darkening of the skies. uh, and but I'm not going to see the sun in eclipse, which I probably wouldn't look at it anyway, because I have a glare sensitivity. But uh, today we are starting our reading of My Brother's Keeper by James Joyce's brother, Stanislaus Joyce. The subtitle of this is James Joyce Early Years. And we're going to begin by reading a short preface by T.S. Eliot. And then there's an introduction by Richard Ellman, the famed biographer of James Joyce. So we shall begin. Curiosity about the private life of a public man may be of three kinds: the useful, the harmless, and the impertinent. It is useful when the subject is a statesman, if the study of his private life contributes towards an understanding of his public actions. It is useful when the subject is a man of letters, if the study throws light upon his published works. The line between curiosity, which is legitimate, and that which is merely harmless, and between that which is merely harmless and that which is vulgarly impertinent, can never be precisely drawn. In the case of a writer, the usefulness of biographical information for increasing our understanding and making possible a keener enjoyment or a more critical valuation will vary according to the type of which the writer is a representative and the way in which he has exploited his own experience in his books. Next reader, please.
It is difficult to believe that greater knowledge about the private life of Shakespeare could much modify our judgment or enhance our enjoyment of his plays. No theory about the origin or mode of composition of the Homeric poems could alter our appreciation of them as poetry. With a writer like Goethe, on the other hand, our interest in the man is inseparable from our interest in the work, and we are impelled to supplement and correct what he tells us in various ways about himself with information from outside sources. The more we know about the man, the better we think we may come to, the better we think we may come to understand his poetry and his prose. In the case of James Joyce, we have a series of books, two of which at least are so autobiographical in appearance that further study of the man and his background seems not only suggested by our own inquisitiveness, but almost expected of us by the author himself. We want to know who are the originals of his characters and what were the origins of his episodes, so that we may unravel the web of memory and invention and discover how far and in what ways the crude material has been transformed. Next, please.
Our interest extends, therefore, inevitably and justifiably to Joyce's family, to his friends, and to every detail of the topography and the life of Dublin, the Dublin of his childhood, adolescence, and young manhood. What Joyce's brother, brother Stanislaus has done for us is to make us acquainted with the family environment in which the two boys grew up, with details that no one else could have provided. We regret that he died leaving the story unfinished. We shall never have, from any other source, the account of the middle years in Trieste, which Stanislaus could have given us. We are fortunate to have so full an account of boyhood and youth in Dublin, for the man who is observing and studying his brother sedulously, admiringly, and jealously, as no one else ever observed or studied him. Next.
It would be a mistake, however, to classify this book as merely a unique piece of documentation on the early life of one of the great writers of the century. My Brother's Keeper is also a remarkable exposition of the relationship between a famous man and a brother of whose existence the world remained unaware. Stanislaus himself in this book becomes as interesting to us as James. The brothers are so much alike and yet so different. James Joyce was devoted to his father and to his father's memory. The attitude of Stanislaus was very different, as instanced by his report of the terrible scene at their mother's deathbed, where James, in political and religious matters, was indifferent or merely mocking. Stanislaus manifests a sometimes appalling violence. I've read the book twice. I find myself fascinated and repelled by the personality of this positive, courageous, bitter man who was a prey to such mixed emotions of affection, admiration, and antagonism, a struggle in the course of which, as Mr. Ellman in his introduction points out, he saw his famous brother at certain moments with a startling lucidity of vision. I had thought that the book might be entitled Memories of a Son and Brother, with another difference. My Brother's Keeper has a quality of candour which reminds me of Gussie's father and son, possessed as he was by the subject of his memoir, Stanislaus Joyce, under the exasperation of this thorn in his flesh, became himself a writer, and the author of this one book, which is worthy to occupy a permanent place in the bookshelves beside the works of his brother. Now,
Okay. We'll go on to the introduction by Richard Ellman.
Okay.
To be the brother of a famous author confers its large duties as well as its small distinctions. Professor Stanislaus Joyce, who died in Trieste on June 16th, 1955, at the age of 70, bore his curious burden with nobility and discomfort. He was among the first to recognize James Joyce's genius, but he found his character very difficult and his later work a waste. In spite of these reservations, he lived a life that was largely shaped for him by his brothers. He guarded truculently from others the right to criticize James, and at the time of his death, he had written a substantial part of a memoir of their life together. The book's title, My Brother's Keeper, summed up his painful service and his sense of bondage, and something else as well. When he referred to it himself, he would give the title and then added, smiling wryly, you know, Cain. In part, he wished to disarm the criticism he expected of his candor. Mainly, he wished to put his case before an imagined tribunal and sardonically presented himself as Cain, because the evidence would show he was not. Yet, he may also have felt his own role as helper to be a little ambiguous, confused, and even by a muted struggle for mastery over the creature who so mastered him. Like all family, including his many sisters, Professor Joyce was capable of such great and sudden insights. It's not difficult to understand how genius cropped up in this household. Next.
Although the title of My Brother's Keeper is only slightly applicable to the years described in this book, it has seemed too important to change. The memoir presents a picture of James Joyce's career and family life through his 22nd year, with occasional glimpses of what was to come. The period when Professor Joyce did, in fact, keep his brother began a little later. If he had lived to finish his book, he would have told how in Trieste from 1905 to 1915, he saved his brother from dubious friends, from dissipation, and from the greater danger of inertia. He would have made this claim as imperatively as possible. He does so in uncollected essays, because James never admitted either that he had been saved or that he needed saving. Yet there seems to be no reason to deny that James spent the 10 years getting into scrapes and that Stanislaus spent the 10 years getting him out of them. Tom.
Another claim Professor Joyce makes is even less contestable. Contrary to the fictional representation of the Joyce family life in A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, he demonstrates that his brother had an intelligent and sympathetic adherent in his own house. Whereas Stanislaus was later a keeper, he was always a disciple. Born the 17th of December 1884, he was nearly 3 years his brother's junior. He trailed him worshipfully. As a boy, he dutifully played truant with him. A few years later, he began to serve as what James called in Ulysses, a little disparagingly, his whetstone. James tried out his theories in Stanislaus, and Stanislaus made useful objections which helped clarify them. Then he began to note down his brother's clever remarks and his own in a diary, for he too had literary ambitions. In the diary, which often saw several rewritings, he tried a few experiments, as when, after reading Tolstoy's Sebastopol sketches, he wrote down all the thoughts of a person going to sleep. James read what he wrote and patronizingly put it aside, but may have drawn from it one of several hints for the interior monologue. In later years, however, James preferred to attribute the discovery of the technique to the forgotten French writer Edouard Dujardin, rather than to a member of his family. Anne?
Originally, James intended to use Stanislaus prominently in his autobiographical novel. So in Stephen Hewer, the trial run for A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, he depicts him as Stephen's brother Maurice and speaks with chaffing affection of his somber gravity and his careful, clearing of his much-worn clothes. The two must have made a startling contrast as they walked through the streets of Drumcondra and Fairview, deep in talk or laughing, heads thrown back in the unrestrained way of which both were unexpectedly capable. Stanislaus heavy-set of medium height, muscular, James tall, thin, loose-jointed. In their manners, too, they were opposite. James unpredictable, Stanislaus downright as a character in Ben Jonson. Stanislaus followed James's intellectual lead in most things, but he usually went further. So James bade farewell coolly enough to the Catholic Church, but Stanislaus continued throughout his life to shake his fist at it. He became, even as a young man, so extreme in his apostasy that James, though seldom the peacemaker, suggested he moderate his revolt, a little in the interest of the family harmony. Stanislaus recognized his indebtedness to James, but he also exhibited a sporadic independence of him that was by turns heroic and pathetic. In his diary for September 1903, when he was 18, he tried to analyze the problem. Okay, we're back to you, Duncan.
Okay. My life has been modeled on Jim's example, yet when I'm accused by my unprepossessing Uncle John or by Gogarty of imitating Jim, I can truthfully deny the charge. It was not merely aping, as they imply. I trust I am too clever and my mind too old for that. It was more an appreciation in Jim of what I myself really admire and wish for most. But it is terrible to have a cleverer older brother. I get small credit for originality. I follow Jim in nearly all matters of opinion, but not all. Jim, I think, has even taken a few opinions from me. In some things, however, I have never followed him. In drinking, for instance, and whoring, in speaking broadly, in being frank without reserve with others, in attempting to write verse or prose or fiction in manner, in ambitious and not always in friendships. I perceive that he regards me as quite commonplace and uninteresting. He makes no attempt at disguise. Though I follow him fully in this matter of opinion, I cannot be expected to like it. It is a matter beyond the power of either of us to help. Next, Katrina.
This self-portrait is unduly harsh. A little later, he notes that his brother has praised his criticism as brilliant, yet even praise fills him with doubt. The diary contains also a portrait of his brother, written at the same time, and while its tone is a little censorious, Stanislaus is obviously under James's spell. Jim is a genius of character. When I say genius, I say just the least little bit in the world more than I believe. Yet remembering his youth and that I sleep with him, I say it. Scientists have been called great scientists because they have measured the distances of the unseen stars, and yet scientists who have watched the movements in matter scarcely perceptible to the mechanically aided senses have been esteemed as great. And Jim is perhaps a genius, though his mind is minutely analytic. He has, above all, a proud, willful, vicious selfishness, out of which by times now he writes a poem or an epiphany, now commits the meanness of whim and appetite, which was at first Protestant egoism, and had perhaps some desperateness in it, but which is now well rooted or developed in his nature a very, what's that word?
I think it's
Egg dressel?
yeah, I can just yeah, it does, yeah.
Okay, take it over, Tom.
He has extraordinary moral courage so great that I hope that he will one day become the Rousseau of Ireland. Rousseau, indeed, might be accused of cherishing the secret hope of turning away the anger of disapproving readers by confessing unto them. But Jim cannot be suspected of this. His great passion is the fierce scorn of what he calls the rabblement, a tiger-like, insatiable hatred. He has a distinguished appearance and bearing and many graces, a musical singing and especially speaking voice, a tenor, a good undeveloped talent in music and witty conversation. He has a distressing habit of saying quietly to those with whom he is familiar the most shocking things about himself and others, and moreover, of selecting the most shocking times for saying them, not because they are shocking merely, but because they are true. There are such things that, even knowing him as well as I do not believe it is beyond his power to shock me or Gogarty with all his obscene rhymes. His manner, however, is generally very engaging and courteous with strangers, but though he dislikes greatly to be rude, I think there is little courtesy in his nature. As he sits on the hearthrug, his arms embracing his knees, his head thrown a little back, his hair brushed up straight off his forehead, his long face red as an Indian's in the reflection of the fire, there is a look of cruelty in his face. Not that he is not gentle at times, for he can be kind, and one is not surprised to find gentleness in him. He is always simple and open with those that are so with him. But few people will love him, I think, in spite of all of his graces and his genius, and whosoever exchanges kindnesses with him is likely to get the worst of the bargain. Anne?
Okay. Characteristically, Stanislaus began to doubt the artistic precision of the description he had just made, and after it he wrote in parentheses, in his clear, methodical hand. This is coloured too highly like a penny cartoon. When a year later, in October 1904, James Joyce abruptly decided to leave Ireland with a young woman named Nora Barnacle, whom he declined to marry, many of his friends and relatives thought him as much a fool as a dastard. Stanislaus had his own misgivings, but he staunchly defended James and kept up an active correspondence with him. James took up residence first in Pola, at that time the principal naval port of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then nearby in Trieste, where he taught at the Berlitz School. He depended upon Stanislaus for news, and even to some extent for subjects. With the avidity of an Oscar Wilde plotting his fictional character as one might, of course, he demanded every scrap of information about the response of Dubliners he knew to his rather historic departure. He frequently borrowed initial hints for his stories from Stanislaus. For the Dead, Stanislaus' description of an Irish tenor's way of singing, a superior chorus in a song of Tom Moore's. For a painful case, Stanislaus' account of a meeting with a married woman at a concert. Inspired cribbing was always part of James's talent. His gift was for transforming material, not for originating it. And Stanislaus was the first of a series of people on whom he leaned for ideas. As he's remarked in later life to Frank Budson, have you ever noticed when you get an idea how much I can make of it? The brothers were not separated for long. After James's departure, Stanislaus had some meagre employment as a clerk, but wrote so bitterly of Ireland that James invited him to come to Trieste, at least for a visit. The invitation, made more and more importantly over several months, seemed to Stanislaus, even at that time, to be in part a plea for support. He had never been away from home before, and Trieste then in Austria must have seemed to his 20 years the end of the earth. Like James, too, he was fonder of Dublin than his excursionations of the city indicated, but he obediently packed up and left for Trieste, arriving there in October of 1905. Next, please, Duncan.
His early letters to his family showed him extremely homesick. He was alarmed, too, to find his brother drinking heavily. He had known too much drunkenness in Ireland to tolerate it here. He asserted a moral authority over James, which he was able to enforce by stronger muscles and dragging him away from bars. James left him in 1906 and went to live in Rome for 6 months. But not liking that city, he returned to Trieste in 1907 to be dragged away from bars some more. The brothers quarreled frequently and were the more bound to each other. They taught for a time at the Burlet School, then finding they could do better with private lessons, left it. Their style of teaching reiterated their differences. Stanislaus was punctual and conscientious in his duties. James invariably arrived for his lessons late, and after a brief drill began to converse about all manner of subjects. The lesson would end with the teacher and pupil singing an Irish song together, after which James would slide down the banister and leave, also very late. James was extravagant in fancy and in finance, and the proceeds of Stanislaus's lessons often ended after James, smiling and smoking a Virginia, had presented his latest need in James's pocket. The seasonal problem that their pupils left Trieste during the hot summer months was too much for James, who could not put by for the summer, and much depended upon Stanislaus to stave off disaster. When he revamped in Finnegan's Wake the fable of the dancing grasshopper and the saving ant, who had a seasonal problem too, he drew upon his experience with his brother by letting the improvident grasshopper carry the day. Next.
Stanislaus kept his brother in humor as well as in funds. He encouraged him when publishers sent rejection slips, as they did almost steadily from 1905 until 1914. It was he also who put the poems of chamber music into a sequence and thought of that title for them. In 1907, just before they were to be published, James suddenly decided that their sentiment was false and went to cable the publisher, Elkin Matthews, not to bring them out. Stanislaus walked up and down in front of the Trieste post office, arguing with him. He finally persuaded James to allow the book to appear because it would help him publish other books. The contrast of opinion was typical. Stanislaus' judgment was sound in practical terms, but James was right in that chamber music looks pale beside his other works. It was Stanislaus who also suggested the title Stephen Hero for the early version of the portrait. He based it on the ballad Turpin Hero that his brother loved to sing. He also advised him when he began to rewrite it to turn the book into an Irish Faust, and this suggestion may account for some of the ruthlessness with which Joyce endows his hero in the later version. Tom.
Until the First World War, Stanislaus continued to play Sancho Panza as Italio Suevo and other Tristan friends inevitably remarked to James's Don Quixote. But his pleasure in the part waned. His sense of an absurdity in his thraldom had grown, and in his dissatisfaction he was accidentally helped by the war which divided him from his brother. In Trieste, the Austrian authorities did not trouble British subjects at first, and according to the one story which James retailed, Stanislaus, in his doctrinaire way, trusted too much to their indifference. He drove round the city with an irredentist friend and was arrested then and interned in an Austrian castle. James, as usual, made out better. Through the intervention of powerful friends, he was allowed to depart with his family for Switzerland and spent war years in comparative comfort in Zurich. There he wrote the greater part of Ulysses. He also returned to drinking, but this did not have the disastrous consequences foretold by Stanislaus. Underneath the excesses, James was able to maintain a secret discipline about his work. Stanislaus's internment was not very rigorous, and as soon as the war ended, he returned to Trieste and resumed his teaching. It was like him to establish himself permanently in the city James first suggested to him, while James experimented with several others. By now, Stanislaus had a group of friends who respected his obstinate, forthright personality and liked his vigor of judgment and blunt humour. During his separation from James, he had thought of not resuming the role of keeper, and James, for his part, had found other keepers whose discipline was less severe. And
Yeah, the eclipse, Tom.
Yeah,
Duncan is showing us
I'm
behind
trying
him.
to take my computer out on the porch
yeah,
to show you how dark it is.
yeah,
Yeah, it's pitch dark.
Struggling. I'm struggling. Hold on. Turn around this way. All right.
yeah, jeepers.
Wow,
That is dark,
Now
yeah,
I'm out on the porch. So
That's
it's just
incredible.
like, probably 8:30, 9 o'clock at night here.
yeah,
that's
And I'm facing
incredible.
south, so this is here. I'm gonna go down a little bit further. Try not to knock myself down. So this is to get out from underneath the porch roof. Okay, so it's not quite
Fantastic.
total yet.
it's like twilight there, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah. But what's interesting is the animals are not, the birds and animals are not reacting.
oh, yeah,
And I think that's because it's been cloudy. In my other eclipse, as it went from daylight to dark, the
yeah,
donkeys and the birds and dogs and everything just went crazy until it got total, and then they became perfectly quiet.
yeah,
Amazing.
Okay, there you go.
good,
Fabulous.
that's great, yeah, great, Duncan.
Now you
Where are
can
you,
say
Katrina? Where are you?
I'm north of San Francisco, and so we're getting about a third of a third of an eclipse. And so no, I can't notice anything. I mean, and actually the
Yeah.
sun's behind a tree now, but I don't notice any dimming or anything. So that was great. Thank you, Duncan.
yeah.
It was
Good.
brilliant.
Experienced it.
Now you can
But
say
but
you saw
it-
the eclipse in Texas.
It
Yeah.
hasn't, it actually has not been total yet. It's still not,
It should be about 3 more minutes for it to be
oh,
total.
okay.
So it's probably 95 or 97% right now.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
Can I keep going?
Yeah.
Are you okay? You're okay, ready? So when James arrived in Trieste late in 1919, the relations were altered. He had an income from a generous patron and was less dependent upon Stanislaus's aid. Stanislaus was understandably rather resentful of his brother's lack of gratitude. At one time, James had talked of dedicating Dubliners to him. When the book was published, had forgotten it. And in the transformation of Stephen Hero into a portrait of the artist, the main casualty, though for good artistic reasons, was Morris, Stephen's brother. Stanislaus did not mention these or other grievances, but during the war he had written James that he hoped to take better care of himself after it. He received his brother rather coldly, listened to him less attentively, and allowed himself to be a little bored by the intricacies of the research for Ulysses. James spent 9 months in Trieste, teaching at a commercial school, which had now become the Università de Trieste. The city, so fallen from its former busy greatness as Austria's merchant port, no longer pleased him. He quickly resolved to leave and was persuaded by Ezra Pound to go to Paris in June 1920, so as to arrange more easily for the publication of Ulysses. At first, Stanislaus was passed over for his brother's position at the university, but after a year it was given to him, and he became a successful and popular professor. In 1927, on the 13th of August, he married Nellie Lichtensteiger, an attractive young woman from a comfortably situated Triestine family of Swiss descent. Next year, the two Joyce families at Salzburg. Professor Joyce's stubborn spirit never permitted him to conceal his opposition to Mussolini's regime, and in 1936 he was expelled from Italy. This punishment was later commuted to dismissal from his professorship. James, who had been accustomed to receiving rather than doing favours for Stanislaus, helped him on this occasion. He met him in Zurich and arranged for him to obtain a teaching post at a boys' school near Zug. Stanislaus decided that its rigid schedule was not for him, and managed through the intercession of a friend in Rome to be restored to his position in Trieste.
Okay, so I'm just showing you how much has changed.
Yeah, it's right there. Yeah.
Oh yeah, light. God said let there be light.
Yeah, it's back to being an afternoon, a cloudy afternoon.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Wow. That was
really?
fast.
All righty. So let's see if I can.
Are you okay? I can do another small bit if you want to settle down. It's the start of the paragraph. The brothers met only 3 times in all after 1920.
You're right. I'm ready to. The brothers met only 3 times after 1920. These last encounters were rather shocking to Stanislaus. When he began to discuss fascism, his brother said impatiently, "Don't talk to me about politics. I'm only interested in style." James, then working on Finnegan's Wake, seemed to Professor Joyce to be consciously arrivé, or rather inaccessible, surrounded by admirers and drinking more than ever. Stanislaus had not approved wholeheartedly of either of the books his brother wrote away from his side. Ulysses appeared to him at first to be willfully derogatory of human life, lacking in those moments of serenity which he remembered as part of his life in Dublin. In after years, however, he saw more humanity in it than before and gave most of it his praise. Finnegan's Wake, however, struck him as the sorry effect of the adulation lavished on James in Paris. His brother seemed to him to be so sure of approval for whatever he did that he had lost interest in communication. He could hardly have sympathized either with the treatment of the theme of the 2 brothers in that book. Shem, who remembers James, is a penman, while his brother Sean, modeled to some extent upon Stanislaus, whose first name, which he never used, was John, is a postman. Shem is a madcap and Sean is a goody-goody boy. Shem is a profligate and Sean a Tartuffe. Shem is the tree and Sean a stone. Joyce, of course, had more in mind than his own fraternal relations, but these played a part too. Next.
Back in Trieste, Stanislaus repeatedly wrote, urging James to abandon Finnegan's Wake and to write something of greater value. When the book was published in 1939, James offered Stanislaus a copy, but Stanislaus refused it, deliberately repudiating for the first time one of his brother's books. They continued to correspond, nevertheless, and it was fitting that James' last note to anyone, written 5 days before his death in Zurich in 1941, should have been to Stanislaus. It was a letter card giving him the name of Italian and other friends who might be able to help him, for Professor Joyce had been put into semi-internment at Florence as an enemy alien. The subsequent news of his brother's death made Stanislaus physically ill. He regretted painfully not having accepted the last proffered gift. I'll bet. Tom.
Their estrangement was dissolved by James's death, and Professor Joyce made himself the keeper of his brother's reputation, repeatedly emerging from silence to denounce some distortion of his brother's youth by other writers of memoirs. Stanislaus's only child, born 2 years after his brother's death, received his brother's name. During the war, he became absorbed in setting down in a book his recollections of James. He conceived his brother's life in botanical terms as the story of a flower's burgeoning and then of its blasting, the blasting to occur after James's final departure from Trieste. He wrote on the basis of a good memory and of the diary which he kept faithfully throughout his life. The finished section, somewhat over half the book he intended to write, is remarkably frank and searching, but what gives his record its special force is that complex mixture of frustration, affection, resentment, and regret which Stanislaus had for the days when he was closest to his brother. Anne?
The exile of Stanislaus from Ireland was much stricter than James. For 49 years, he did not re-enter an English-speaking country, while his brother made a series of trips to Ireland and England. But during the summer of 1954, Professor Joyce decided to travel to England and perhaps even to Ireland. Not having money to waste, he arranged to go to London as guide for a group of Triestine students. They travelled as cheaply as possible and sat up on trains and boats for a day and a half. His health had seemed excellent, but the strain affected his heart. Yet he stubbornly rejected diagnosis of heart trouble and shopped among English doctors looking for one who agreed with him that the discomfort was of no consequences. Those who saw him then felt nevertheless the perplexity into which the sudden question had forced him. Professor Joyce was invited to Dublin, but decided not to go, feeling that if he went, he would have to tell his fellow countrymen that their only reason for respecting his brother now was his acclaim abroad, to which they could not entirely shut their ears. He returned to Trieste to find himself more seriously impaired than he had admitted. He tried various doctors in medicine, but complained that they made him feel worse, and in a characteristically broad gesture of reunification dispensed with them. The day he died, the 16th of June, 1955, was Bloomsday, the day his brother had made famous. Stanislaus himself was accustomed to celebrate the anniversary with a party. Coincidence helped to bind the brothers in death, as they had been bound in life. The book he left reveals his virtue. His Triestine friends thought of Professor Joyce as like Cato, and there is something of Cato among monumental integrity in his life. Incapable of anything less than honesty, he antagonized imperial and fascist authorities alike. In his liberal and anti-clerical views, he was a Democrat of the school of 1848. He struggled for a more personal freedom too, attempting to find himself a character distinct from his brothers. In the end, we may well feel that the most surprising aspect of this much humiliated spirit is his sturdy pride.
All right.
Yeah.
That's it, isn't it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting introduction.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. And actually, June 16th is mentioned twice.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what the first mention of the date was.
Yeah, it was definitely mentioned twice.
It's definitely mentioned twice. Yeah.
Well, at the very start, he did just say that he died on June 16th, the third line down from Richard Ellman's introduction.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Hmm.
That is curious.
Yeah.
Mhm. And does anybody know what he was a professor of?
I don't know. I
No,
just
I
thought he was a
don't.
teacher.
Yeah. Probably, possibly English, I suppose.
Mm,
Don't
I
know.
would say so.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It was
Yeah, I find it interesting that the Berlitz Language School turned
Yeah.
into a university. That's a little
Yeah.
unusual.
Mm.
Yeah.
All
It
right,
has to
but
have been very difficult for him.
Yeah. And the other thing that struck me was I didn't realize that he never came back to Ireland at all.
mhm.
Yeah.
When he, yeah. Um,
Let's see. Okay, so was it England? Okay, and perhaps even to Ireland.
Mm.
yeah. And then
He
he
went to-
says then his health got worse and he didn't go to Ireland.
okay, yeah. Professor Joyce was invited to Dublin, but decided not to go.
Yeah.
And also, he'd have to tell them what he thought of them.
Yeah.
They weren't following James now because he was famous abroad.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably nothing, but it is a strange coincidence that he would
is.
have his heart trouble appear right as he's thinking about he's in England and thinking about going to Dublin.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, because sitting up in a train and a boat for a day and a half, that give you heart trouble?
Well, it could be a strain.
Could be strange. He must have had
Yeah.
something before that.
I would think so. I mean, it sounded like he was not a fan of doctors
Mm.
in general. And it's actually kind of humorous when he didn't like the doctor's diagnosis and wanted to find a different doctor. You know, it's just very, yeah, it's very male. I should say that.
Yeah.
Mm.
I like the little description of that, comparing them to Don Quixote.
Oh, Finnegan's Wake. Oh, Don Quixote, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's funny.
Right, Sancho Panza and Don
And I suppose
Quixote.
because he was small and sturdy, he probably would have looked like Pancho, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, was Stanislaus significantly shorter than James? I mean, James was
They seem to,
tall
they
and
seem to say
thin,
that,
and
don't they?
Stanislaus was.
Well, I don't know about his pictures, but we know that Joyce was fairly tall, like and thin, kind of.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, they were completely the opposite.
Yeah.
Just to get down to basic facts, what was the age difference between them?
2 years.
Nearly
and
3 years.
Yeah, 2
Yeah.
years and 9 months, I think he said. Yeah, somewhere. Yeah,
He
nearly 3 years.
did, yeah. Nearly 3, because he was born in December and James was born in February, obviously.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it would have only been those 2 or 3 months between
Mhm,
to bring
mhm,
it up to 3 years.
mhm.
Yeah, so Stanislaus was heavy set, medium height, muscular, while James was tall, thin, loose jointed. So the complete opposites in stature.
Yeah.
I'm also going back and I'm taking a look at the pages of the T.S. Eliot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I find it curious that T.S. Eliot wrote the preface for this book. And I'm trying to imagine under what circumstance. I mean, for Ellman to write an introduction, I'm not surprised at all because,
Yeah.
it's part of his thing with biography. But for Eliot to get involved, I find curious.
Yeah, although I think he visited Joyce in Paris, T.S. Eliot. I mean, maybe that might have been a lot. I don't know when that was. But there's the story that he brought Joyce, was it a
Some
pair of boots?
parcel or something.
A parcel
Yeah.
with boots in it, I think, yeah. Or a suit. I think it was boots, I'm not certain, yeah. So they would have known. I think he supported when Ulysses came out, he supported Joyce, he was all in favor of it.
Mm-hmm.
They may have known each other a little, and by that stage, when was this published? First published in 1958.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know when Eliot died. So by that time, they may have went to Eliot because he had assumed such a great stature himself at that time. Then Eliot, possibly.
Mm-hmm. I'm just looking, I'm seeing that this book is copyrighted 1958 by Nellie Joyce.
And of course, all right, yeah. And of course, the other thing was published by Faber and Faber. And of course, that's where Eliot was the director.
Exactly, yeah.
He was the top man in Faber and Faber, Eliot, yeah.
He was.
Yeah. So that could have been
the
connection, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just Googled it. On a trip to Paris in August 1920 with the artist Wyndham Lewis, he met the writer James Joyce. This is T.S. Eliot. Eliot said he found Joyce arrogant, and Joyce doubted Eliot's ability as a poet at the time. But the two writers soon became friends, with Eliot visiting Joyce whenever he was in Paris. And I remember your story as well. There was some story about the shoes or the boots.
There's some parsley brought him at some stage, yeah.
So when they first met, Joyce considered Eliot not much of a poet, but somehow they managed a friendship in spite of it all.
Yeah, exactly.
But Stanislaus apparently was not, didn't even like Ulysses, much less Finnegan's Wake.
I knew he didn't like Finnegan's Wake. I didn't know he didn't like Ulysses initially.
Yeah, well, it says that he found it too negative.
Yeah.
Then he also claims to have been giving him some of the ideas, like interior monologue.
Yeah.
And Story for the Dead and A Painful Case.
Yeah.
It's true. When he said to Frank Budgeon, have you ever noticed when you get an idea how much I can make of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good quote.
That's wonderful.
That's a good quote. Yeah. Which is exactly Shakespeare also.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure Shakespeare ever had an original idea, but he was a master at taking other more older writings and using them for his own purposes.
Yeah. And transforming them. Joyce, he mentions there somewhere, and other people, how Joyce transformed things when he got a hold of them,
Mm-hmm.
It could be anything. It could be tidbits or little things or a story, and he'd transform it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think where he said somewhere in one of the letters, he says, it was like what happens to the communion at Mass. It's transformed into the body and blood of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Transubstantiation. And he
Mm-hmm.
kind of said that's what I'm doing with the writing on that. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
which he did do to a great extent, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's also kind of Dante as well,
Right. Yeah.
taking
Yeah.
old material and making it something new.
Yeah.
But it seems pretty obvious to me that actually James Joyce determined the trajectory of Stanislaus's life.
Yeah.
It seems doubtful that, well, I'm making wild assumptions here, but it seems doubtful that Stanislaus would ever have left Ireland if
No,
not
he
for his brother.
yeah, he probably wouldn't. Yeah. And I think he brought his sister over as well, Joyce.
Mm-hmm.
There's two sisters.
Mm-hmm.
Two sisters, yeah.
Yeah. And that's where he got the idea to open a cinema in Dublin. Because there was loads of cinemas. Do you remember that? Yeah, one of the sisters just passed the remark that there was loads of cinemas in Trieste and none in Dublin. And that's where that idea came from.
Yeah, yeah.
We came across that from one of the books when we were reading it.
That was probably
Portrait of an Artist or Stephen Hero, one of them. Oh no, or it might have been John McCourt's books. Was it? It was one of the
John
books
McCourt.
anyway.
Let's see, John
was
McCourt.
One of them. Could have been one of them as well.
Well, the only McCourt book that we read was Consuming Joyce, which
I thought we did both of them.
I don't think that we read the book about Joyce and Trieste.
I can't remember the name.
I don't think we did. But we did read that real kind of pop version of Nora.
Nora, yeah.
By Nuala O'Connor.
Consuming Joyce and the Years of Bloom.
Yeah, I don't think that we read that because it's hard to get a hold of.
Okay, because I have stickies in there, so I assume then that I read it with you.
Who knows? Maybe I'm losing my mind. Maybe I'm losing my mind.
Nah, you're okay. It's normally a sign I have loads of them actually.
But anyway, the only McCourt book that I remember reading in the Mundry Book Club when it was based in fact that was the book that we finished when Jack gave up the Monday Book Club, and some of us were determined to keep it going. We were finishing up the Consuming Joyce. Yeah. Okay, but we should see if we read that other John McCourt book.
I can't remember. I just took it for granted that we did.
You might be right. I do believe, Anne, that you're a bit more organized than I am.
Well, I have both of them signed by John McCourt because he was lecturing over in UCC one night, and I ran over and got him signed.
Okay, excellent. Going back,
I could look at my old diaries and we'll find out.
There you go. Okay. I'm quickly looking through this little short preface by T.S. Eliot.
Yeah, one of the things that he says there is that, and it's a strange thing too, the difference between them, that Joyce was very devoted to his father,
Mhm.
and that Stanislaus wasn't. And even though his father kind of was very rough and ready sometimes in his drunkenness, it never seemed to affect James in the way it affected Stanislaus, who, but James always held this great devotion to his father. Yeah, so I think that's another kind of big difference between
Uh-huh.
Huge.
yeah.
Mhm. Well, I mean, let's just say James, from my understanding, James thought about his father more and used his father's personality more.
Yeah,
But I mean, he did neglect the old man.
yeah. He never
He
never
never
went.
went, he never really went back. Even
No,
when his father, apparently, when his father got destitute in later life and was living in a
yeah,
hotel room, very sick.
yeah,
I didn't know that.
Mhm.
About John
His
Joyce,
father.
his final days. Yeah, I would have to look it up to get the details, but I do remember clearly that there was some complaint from the father about that James never came to see him.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Amazing he didn't.
And I'm not even, yeah, I have to check on this and, call me out if you know. I'm not sure that in the couple of times that he went back to Ireland, whether he even saw his father. Like when he went back to visit Galway and when he went back to, do you know?
I think he did. I think on one occasion anyway, his father met them at the station, and I think on another occasion, himself and James went out walking out kind of into the country, and there was a place called the Yellow House, and they went in there, and one of them sat at the piano and started singing, and the other sang with his father. I think that on one of his visits,
Okay.
there's a book, yeah, and also when his father was dying, he was in contact. I think there's a real person out of Ulysses who was looking after his father. It's not Alfie Bergen's, one of the other characters. And Joyce was in touch with him to kind of do various things, and yeah. But anyway, yeah, it's a thing that's kind of vague in my mind. But there's a book out on the book. It's a great book actually on John Stanislaus Joyce and his father by can never think of his name.
Costello?
No, the other guy. The Costello, and I know him well. He had a bookshop actually here in Wexford, down in Gorey, and he's written several books.
Mm-hmm.
But he wrote it. I think it was along with either. He did a book with Costello on Dubliners. I think you might have mentioned it, Duncan, on the
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But he has a book out on John Stanislaus Joyce, the father, and it's extremely detailed. And it's
Yeah, actually, I have a copy, but unfortunately, I have packed it up already.
all right, yeah, yeah,
And I would have no idea what box it's in. I may not see it again for 10 years, assuming I'm around in 10 years.
yeah.
Let's see here. What do we got?
I almost get his name.
Let's see. What is John Joyce's middle name?
It's John Stanislaus. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Oh, okay.
Mm.
There we go.
It says on the back of the book that he was a professor of literature.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is kind of vague.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Well, since we are actually going to be rereading these sections next week, I'm assuming that we'll have 3 or 4 other people at the Monday reading next week.
Mhm.
I think we can probably wrap up today,
Okay.
and who knows what we'll discover between now and
Yep.
next Monday.
Homework.
Yeah, the person,
I've enjoyed it. Hmm?
the person I was trying to think of there was John Wise Jackson, and
Ah,
Peter, and
okay.
Peter Costello, yeah, and they did a book on the father, which is
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
one you have. Yeah.
Yeah.
John White Jackson.
Mm.
Uh-huh. And I have it somewhere. It's one of those books that
Okay.
I have in my library that I have not.
Yeah.
I've read a little bit of, but didn't. I probably still have 90% of it left to read.
One to look for.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Anything else before we wrap up today?
When I bought this, my copy of My Brother's Keeper, which is probably 15, 20 years ago in a secondhand bookshop, I found a little cutting from a newspaper in it. And I don't know whether you can see it or not there. James Joyce Brothers died.
Let's see. I'm going to put you
Wow.
on, if we put you on speaker's view here.
It was the one that was on the paper
Yeah.
for his. That's incredible.
And it was in the book, like, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it was dated the 17th, the following day, I presume, the 1755, yeah. So it was a strange thing to find in the book. It was a secondhand
It
book.
was a fabulous.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Love those things.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that, Tom.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Katrina, you have anything else you want to say today?
No,
No.
very interesting.
Okay. And
Absolutely. It was great.
Mhm.
I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to
well-
reading it. I have read it. I've read it twice, but that was on
Yeah.
my own, so it's a completely different experience.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. I mean,
Thanks, Duncan.
you helped me survive the
Thank you.
eclipse here.
And especially
Oh,
Duncan.
it was lovely. Thank you for showing us that.
Thank you.
Great.
We shared
A
it.
glimpse of
Take care.